Welcome back, y'all, to CrossPolitic. Here we are. And with us, we're really thankful to have Mr. Jason Riley. He's an editorial board member from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Where he has contributed since 1994. Even Salon says, quote, "The American left should start paying attention to the Wall Street Journal's Jason Riley. His name is on the rise."
Wow, how did that happen?
He's the author of the book that we really want to talk to him about today called Please Stop Helping Us, How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. Jason, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Jason, when you say that liberal policies are making it hard for blacks to succeed, what are you talking about? What do you mean by that?
I'm talking mainly about the welfare state, the Great Society programs that were introduced in the 1960s, and looking at the black outcomes that have followed the implementation of those policies. And I contrast that with some of the outcomes that we saw in the first half of the 20th century with respect to racial gaps in schooling or incomes or home ownership, and the track record we saw then in the first half of the 20th century. And I concluded that although we hear a lot about the legacy of slavery when it comes to explaining racial inequality today, I think we should be more focused on the legacy of the Great Society, the legacy of the welfare state, and contributing to these racial disparities as well.
So, Jason, are you saying that the welfare state is just another form of slavery?
Well, I wouldn't put it quite that crudely, but I would say that a lot of the well-intentioned efforts to help the black underclass simply are not getting the job done. And I think we need to reevaluate how we go about helping this group of people. I mean, some of the progress that's been that we saw in the first half of the 20th century, in the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s, we've seen that progress either slow or in some cases reverse course in the second half of the 20th century. So I think we really need to take another look at the programs and policies that we're directing at poor individuals, and the black poor in particular.
You also get into kind of the social side of this, the community side of this, and the kind of challenges that the black culture is facing and how that's kind of contributing to the problem. Talk about that for a second.
Well, yes, I think what you've seen since the 1960s in particular in the civil rights community and just on the political left in general is a focus on enhancing black political clout, political power, electing more black officials. And the thinking has been if we do that, socioeconomic advancement will follow naturally. And this, of course, culminated with the election of President Obama in 2008. That was the ultimate goal of this strategy. And, it wasn't, obviously, there had been black elected officials before running large cities in the U.S., from Detroit to Washington, D.C., New York, Atlanta, and so forth. So we've had black political clout to some extent, success in that arena to some extent over the decades. But the presidency was really the culmination of this strategy. But you have not seen the socioeconomic gains flow naturally from increasing black political clout. So I think that strategy has not accomplished what it set out to. And if you look back at history, there was no expectation there should have been no expectation that it would. Other groups that have risen in this country from poverty to prosperity typically have not gone the political route. They've developed culturally. They've developed the right human capital, is how economists describe it, the right attitudes and behaviors and values have been developed first. And that has been the foundation of their rise economically, not political clout per se.
And it seems like you added to that was kind of the decline of the black family, divorce rates. And even you kind of illustrated kind of I wouldn't say maybe it's a disdain, but a dislike for even coming off as white and educated. You mentioned a couple examples in your book where you were made fun of for what it seemed like they would call either talking white or sounding educated. And so it kind of shakes its way out even to that kind of, it's almost like maybe this is bad terminology too, but reverse racism, where it's like you sound smart, therefore, does that make sense?
Well, it's the phenomenon is known as acting white, and it's something that you'd be hard-pressed to come across a middle-class black person in this country who has not experienced the phenomenon. And even President Michelle Obama have told stories about this. It's just extremely common that there is a sense in poor black communities in particular, a sort of ghetto mentality regarding how black people are supposed to act and sound, and their values, values towards work, towards education, towards parenting. And it's an oppositional mindset. It's an oppositional mindset. And blacks who do not conform to that mindset are made fun of. So if you are a bookish, studious kid, if you raise your hand in class, if you enjoy school, that is something that people will mock. If you use correct English, grammatical English, that is something to be mocked. And so yes, I think that is a problem in the black community. You mentioned divorce. I think it's more marriage in general, and particularly out of wedlock birth rates, where we've seen a tremendous growth in that area, and that was not something you saw again in the first half of the 20th century. You go back to as late as 1960, you had 2 out of 3 black kids being raised in a 2-parent home. Today, more than 70% are not, and in some of our inner cities, it's as high as 80 or 90%, and that's I think that's a huge problem, that breakdown of the black family.
So we've kind of talked about the problem, the political problems, and kind of just touched on some of the familial challenges. What do you think is the solution in all this?
Well, I think one solution is to stop doing things we know don't work.
That's hard.
And the
That's
way
so
that
hard.
Well, it's not really about a new government program to solve these problems.
Absolutely.
I think that's misguided. I think we need to remember what blacks were able to accomplish in the first half of the 20th century, when at best the government's attitudes towards blacks was indifference.
Yeah.
Yet you saw tremendous gains being made in terms of the rate at which blacks were leaving poverty or entering the skilled professions in the middle class, increasing their years of education, both in absolute terms and relative to whites. All this was being done in a tremendously oppressive environment racially in this country. We had legal segregation, tremendous negative attitudes towards blacks, which were very socially acceptable, yet that could not stop blacks from narrowing the gaps with whites in terms of socioeconomic progress. So this is not about reinventing the wheel. This is about getting back to doing the things that worked before. And a lot of that, I think, involves the government getting out of the way. Right now, in our things like keeping kids trapped in bad schools, for example. Right. Give poor parents access to better schools. I think minimum wage laws are misguided in the sense that they prevent a lot of less skilled, less educated blacks, less experienced blacks from getting that first job.
Yeah. Because
the minimum wage laws make them too expensive to hire.
Yeah.
So fewer of them are hired than would be hired otherwise. And you don't get that first job. You don't get your foot on that first rung of the ladder. You don't get that experience. And so I think these, again, are well-intentioned policies that I think are doing more harm than good. Occupational licensing laws that make it difficult to drive a cab or to open a hair salon or something like that.
Let me interject.
Again, these are getting in the way of progress.
And let me interject here on these points too. I feel like when I get in these kind of discussions, I feel like a lot of it has to do with it feels like to me a lot of it's going a lot of rearranging of the furniture is what's being discussed. So maybe eliminate this policy, or maybe open up education to the a school choice and all those things. Those to me feel like very much kind of rearranging the furniture. When we introduced ourselves before we went live on the air, we talked about how we're a Christian podcast and how our solution we want to get to the heart of the matter, which is people's hearts. You can't. I mean, just giving educating a criminal, giving them education is just going to make them a better criminal. When it seems like the bigger issue is actually people's hearts need to change in all this. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would agree with that. Our jails and prisons are not full of educated people. They're not teeming with black college graduates or even black high school graduates. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we know. One of the best ways to keep people out of the penal system is to get them to graduate from high school. The correlation between people who graduate from high school and people who stay out of trouble with the law is quite high. So I think education is a good thing, and that we should be encouraging more of it. Now you're right that you have to have the right attitudes. In other words, you can have the best school in the world down the street, but if you don't value education, it's not going to do you any good. You have to want to go there, want to sit in class, and want to learn. And that's something that's sort of outside of the parameters of public policymakers and politicians, and it's cultural.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of cultural defects in poor black communities that we don't like to talk about. It's a little taboo to discuss publicly.
Yeah.
And so we don't talk about it. But that's really, I think, is the pointing towards the solution. You need self-development to occur. The type of self-development that was occurring in the first half of the 20th century, that's been stunted to some extent, and that we need to get back to that, because that is ultimately how we're going to close these gaps that we see. It's not going to come from some government solution. It's going to come from within the community, and people reassessing their value framework and getting the right attitudes and habits and behaviors in place.
Historically, of course, education has been all about the truth. Historically, education has been all about teaching human beings to be who God made them to be, calling them to pursue truth, goodness, and beauty in every way. And that's always a heart issue, just like you're saying, Gabriel. It's about the fact that human beings are made in the image of God. And so true education has always been aimed at calling people to know truly who they are, who God's made them to be. And that means grappling with all of these most significant issues. Hey, it's been great to have you on the show today, Jason Riley, the author of Please Stop Helping Us, How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. Jason Riley is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and Salon says, you got to pay attention to this guy. Hey, it's been great having you on our show. Thank you so much, Jason. You have a great weekend.
And more CrossPolitic when we come back.